And the reason why I chose the title Theory of Samsara is because it's related to the very foundation of Buddhist teachings, on something called the Four Noble Truths. Now, if you don't know what samsara is, it's a bit confusing, but samsara is the mundane world where we suffer. So there, in Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths, and there's two sets, cause and effect, cause and result. One is the theory of samsara, the theory of why we suffer, and the other is the theory of nirvana. That's how we achieve well-being and liberation, especially awakening, for example. But principle in this is that you have the power and you have to take control. And something I say on the channel time and time again is it's no good just thinking, oh, I like the sound of Tibetan Buddhism, showing up at a Buddhist temple, and then just copying what other people are doing, just out of routine. What you need to do is gain your own personal experience. You need understanding, experience, and eventually you need your own realization. But the way we go about things is that we just kind of want to accept what other people say, right? And that's a real mistake as far as I can see. Because if you want your own path and your own realization to be deeply embodied, then it has to develop in this way. There's something called the progressive path and the direct path. And the direct path is the path of direct insight. This is the difference between method and wisdom. And how you do that is by honestly, in an authentic way, is analyzing your own experience and not accepting things just out of respect or veneration.
Lama Choga, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. You've got the experience of living as a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and now you seem to be sharing your wisdom with the West. Maybe we could start with a little bit of your backstory. It sounds like you spent 12 years in a monastic monastery somewhere. Maybe you could tell us a little about your story, why you chose that path, and how it's brought you to where you are right now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we've got at least an hour because this is going to be a long answer. It's quite difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because, we go through life and we're looking for answers. And at different times, we find different solutions to our problems. And so this story is one that started out when I was quite young. I think the first time I thought about it, I was maybe less than 6 years old. But I kind of have this habit where I need to understand things. And when I was a child, I used to take things apart. And it was really funny because when I came back to Canada recently, I'd mentioned this thing that as a young child, I was like, take things apart, fix them. And this was something that always kind of was a proof to me that we had some past lives because people have certain skills, they have certain personality. And these things kind of perplexed me. And also what perplexed me is the kind of the big questions, for example, where things come from. And of course, when you're a child, then people always give you trite answers, right? Parents and teachers, they give you trite answers. They say, well, I mean, the solution or the answer that was given when I was young was like God created everything. But it didn't take very long for me to ponder on that, that answer. And then another question arose, and that was, well, where the hell did God come from then? And so this is kind of what set me off on the journey. And I'd always been looking for this because I felt like in order to make a decision of how you're going to live live your life in an authentic manner, then you basically have to understand some things, what we call first principles, underlying assumptions of reality, right? Like, for example, if this is a one-hit life, if this is it, right? Just an accident of evolution, and we're born once, and then it's over, that experience will no longer persist into the future, then the kind of decisions I'm going to make are going to be very different than if there are subsequent lifetimes. Or, for example, if there's isn't actually a thing called lifetime, there's just a consciousness that persists and has different kind of appearances or illusions that it interacts with. And so I've been looking for these answers from a young age. What I found is that quite early on that I rejected Christianity. I come from Edmonton, Alberta. Especially in those days, it's quite right-wing and very sort of Christian-centric. And so all of the answers I got were based on that. For example, at a young age, I wondered about animals and their how self-aware they were and what level of consciousness they had. For example, did they experience emotions and feelings? And what I was taught by the Sunday school teacher, for example, was that animals had no souls and they were put on this planet by God for our enjoyment, so we could have stuff to eat, etc. And again, my acceptance of that lasted about 15 seconds because whenever you look at an animal, then immediately you can see that they have personalities, right? They have feelings. Sometimes they're afraid. They get overjoyed when they see their master come home. So all
And
these things didn't make sense.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, obviously
Just
then
the
I
truth.
wasn't a vegetarian, but I became a vegetarian quite a young age. I've been a vegetarian for over 40 years now. And it was this. I wasn't really comfortable with the idea of eating another sentient being, a self-aware being that experienced pain and suffering. Because I thought, well, I wouldn't like that myself, right? But first, the answer I got was, well, God put the animals here for us. And as I slowly lost faith in this narrative that God was responsible for everything and had agency and that it was okay, then the answer I got from science was, for example, that animals don't have emotions or feelings. This is common narrative. I think a lot of the scientists I met when I was young were actually kind of Christian scientists. They were quite Christian centric as well. But I rejected these things. So for a long time, I was looking for answers. To cut a long story short, then when I became kind of an adult, let's say, then I decided I would leave the home and go looking for answers or choose a different path. I'd become very disillusioned with modern Western life. I saw it to be somehow there was something that's quite not quite right. Especially Canada, for example, in the 70s was very wealthy, and I lived in Edmonton, Alberta, and that was one of the most affluent parts of Canada at that time. But at the same time, what I understood was that there were 1 million people dying in Africa every year from starvation, and that didn't seem right to me. I kind of needed to know why that would be okay. And for example, if there was a creator God, then why would that God allow this to happen? Why would this kind of disparity be created in the first place? There are a lot of things I was uncomfortable with. And I became disillusioned with the kind of narrative that we'd been sold. I mean, I remember this is one thing that actually set me on the path. When I was 6 years old, my father had explained kind of the meaning of life to me in a typical way. And it's no criticism of him. He's like an immigrant, an Asian immigrant. He's from Korea. And their mentality is basically you've got to work hard, right? And feed your family. And I'd said something like, I just started going to school. And I'd said something like, why do I have to go to school, Dad? And he said, well, you have to go to school because you have to get a good job. What you need to do is you need to go to school and then you need to get a degree. And based on that, you get a good job. And I said, it's okay. I don't need a good job. I can clean the streets or something like that. I don't mind. I'll do some menial labor. I don't need a good job. So I don't have to go to school, right? And he said, no. It's not like that because you're going to need a good job because you need to feed your family. And I was a little kid, right? I was less than 6 years old. I was quite young. And I thought, well, that's crazy. I don't have a family. He said, no, but you will have one. And I said, but what if I don't want a family? He said, no, you need a family. Because if you don't have a family, who's going to carry your name? And immediately in my mind, I thought, for Christ's sake, there's like there's 1 billion people named Lee in the world. Why do I need to carry my name on? Or Smith or Jones or whatever like that, right? And
That's
then
good.
I just thought the whole world is crazy. This is what we do, right? There's got to be a better pretext for existence.
There's no name
than that.
special enough that's enough to you know what I mean? There's no unique name. I don't care what your name is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're afraid of mortality is what it is.
Yeah.
And then we start realizing we're not going to live forever. Then we want to make families and have children, etc. And it's kind of like somebody else said this to me. He said, well, this is what we do. This is what humans do. We get married, we have children.
It is what we do, though.
Yeah, it's what we do. But I mean, that's the reason for doing it, for example. But I needed to know, right? I needed to know why we exist in the first place, because there's this problem about infinite regress, right? If you think whether you say the Big Bang created the universe or whether you say God created the universe, then the next question is, well, where did that come from? Right? When you ask AI, it says, where did the universe come from? It's, well, it came from the Big Bang. And when you ask what the Big Bang is, and it says something like, there was this infinitely energetic field of radiation It's like, oh, so something preceded the Big Bang, right? There have to be conditions. Also, if you think about it, then there also have to be, most scientists will agree, there have to be some laws of the universe in existence in order for the processes that exist in the early formation of the universe to come about, right? So they are pre-existing conditions. And like I say, anyway, I'm going into too much detail, but this perplexed me. But what happened was when I was about 17 years old, what happened when I was like 6, I thought, okay, the world is crazy. And I had this vague notion when you were 18 years old that you were then free to do what you liked. You were an adult. It was like, I've got to go to school, okay. And I've got no choice because I'm a kid. And I had this kind of notion that, well, when you were an adult, you can leave home and you can do what you like. So I planned, okay, I'll just wait my time. And then when I'm 18, I'll leave and I'll try to find a life for myself. And it was really funny because I'd said that to one of my friends at high school, and he said, "Oh, that's not true. You can leave home legally when you're 15 or something." I was like, "Oh no, I screwed up." Right. So I was at that time I was 17, and then basically I left home, and I was very disillusioned with the world because there's this kind of like industrial military complex. There's people being abused and kind of used in Africa and all over the world, and I thought this is crazy. And I looked at the map and I thought, right. I'm leaving this place, and where can I go? And I had several choices. At the time, I was a musician, and I also had a kind of naive idea that, well, it's not a naive idea, it's quite correct. Music does have the ability to influence and change the world, change people's minds. The problem with music is that it can also influence people quite negatively, and probably the majority of music is just done for entertainment, etc. But it is very profound. And so I saw this as being something very spiritual that could change people's minds. And so I looked at the map and I thought, well, my choices in Canada were basically Vancouver or Montreal, probably something like that where art is happening. And I thought there's too many drug addicts in Vancouver. I quite like Montreal. I thought there's LA and New York, really great cities, but I didn't want to live in America. And in the end, I decided I would go to Britain, to London, because that was kind of the center of the new wave kind of punk movement at that time. And I went there and I basically made myself homeless and lived in a kind of squat commune, an artist commune there, and lived kind of like a 21st century troubadour. And I thought that through music, then I could find spiritual answers. And I think it's true to some extent through your experiences, even through the use of intoxicants, as I've recently mentioned in a previous video, then it is possible to gain insight. But there are great kind of pitfalls and dangers associated with that path because unfortunately, especially in the music industry, then a lot of it's fueled by greed and it's power games and also the music industry is just rife with things like cocaine and alcohol and drug abuse, etc. So it's really quite tenuous. It's quite dangerous. And I was on that path for quite a while. I studied and experimented with shamanism and pagan religions and studied a lot of things like Egyptian symbology, etc. But the one thing that was quite became obvious to me over my life is that I continued to come back to Buddhism. It's like the answers I was looking for, the questions that I was asking were best answered through the Buddhist teachings. And it had to do with things, for example, like where did the universe come from, etc. What is the cause of suffering? And there are many different answers, right? I mean, if you ask a totally worldly person, well, is the world perfect? No, it's not perfect. Are there problems? Yes. How do we solve those problems? For very worldly people, then it's like, well, we have to increase wealth, or we have to give people food. That's actually quite a low-level view, right? If you see somebody who's on the street and they're not doing well, and you think, okay, I'll give them some food, then in general, we know that tomorrow they'll still be hungry unless they can improve themselves. And then some people will think, well, what you need to do is give them an education. Scientists, their answer is basically, for example, if we have greater knowledge, if we understand the world, then we can learn to control it and we can overcome suffering. And so I looked into all of these different angles. Now, the one that most of us fall for is the scientific position. And it's quite easy, but a few things became apparent to me quite early on in my life. For example, I'm young enough to remember the Cold War, and also the kind of promises and propaganda that was spread around the development of atomic energy. we were told that if we had limitless sources of energy, then we would end the world's problems because people would no longer need to fight over things. But what the truth is that this development brought us closest to self-annihilation that we've ever been, right? So there was something missing in the scientific position, and this kind of was apparent to me through the teachings of Buddha. And that is, you could develop whatever technology you like, you can be the most advanced civilization in the entire universe, but as long as you still possess these negative emotions, these what we call kleshas, then you're destined to history is destined to repeat itself. And to cut a long story short, then I had an interest in Buddhism. I mean, all of this is covered on a biography that I did on my channel, so you can check that out if you want. It's called 12 Years in Retreat or something like that. But uh, I mean, there's a few coincidental things that happen on the path. When you're on the spiritual path, there are coincidences that happen. Once you make a decision, I have to understand or I have to gain spiritual knowledge, I have to, whatever it is you're looking for on the path, then once you make that commitment, then coincidences happen. Things kind of fall together. And one of these was I used to tour, right? I used to be a musician. I would tour up and down the country and all over Europe and Japan and places like that. And we'd often be on the motorway in Britain going north to Scotland. And every time we passed the turnoff for a place called Lockerbie, I had this strong urge to get off the road and go there. But there's nothing in Lockerbie. Couldn't figure it out because the only thing Lockerbie is famous for is that there was a kind of there was a bomb, a terrorist bomb, and an airplane fell there. So that's why it's famous in the world. And I couldn't figure it out. But it was many years later I discovered that the first Tibetan monastery in the West was built right near Lockerbie, and that's where you would get off the road in order to go there. And so through various connections, for example, I started looking into yoga, something I did when I was younger. And through that, then I met a woman who had a connection with the Tibetan temple in Scotland. And then that's how I made my connection with Tibetan Buddhism, and specifically this lineage, which is called the Karma Kagyu. And then how I ended up in retreat, it was it's kind of a normal way that we do these things. When we get involved with something and then we see that to be important or significant, then we kind of want to up our game, right? Like if you really get into kite surfing, and then eventually you're going to start buying the best gear or looking for the best places, or if you're into whitewater rafting, it's like that, right? And so generally what most people do is they think, well, I need to improve my meditation and I need to find more depth or profundity. And in general, then in the Karma Kagyu tradition, what you hear is what's taught continually is you just have to do a 4-year retreat. And so I kind of set my sights on that at one point. But whether or not that can actually happen is quite a difficult thing. That's a different story. So, yeah.
So you started with is that what you started with, a 4-year retreat?
No, that's when that was my aspiration in order to deepen my practice. Now, here's the thing that happens for most of us, right? We hear about the spiritual path, like yoga or whatever. We hear about meditation, and we go somewhere, an ashram or a temple, and what do they basically say? It's like, sit down and watch your breath, or don't get distracted. And that's kind of what we do. That's one type of meditation. It's called shamatha. But there's something else that's more elusive, and it's called insight. And insight exists in all spiritual traditions. What it actually is in practice, it differs depending on the view. View is very important. Um, but it's this that you need to develop if you want to really understand meditation. This practice of stilling the mind, experiencing peace and tranquility, the ability to focus on a single object, that's the side of method. That's what's called method. And it's a practice called shamatha, or calm abiding. And that's what most people think meditation is. That's like most people, for them, that's all they know, meditation. There's that which brings about the results of transcendence and awakening, and that's something else, and that's called insight. And insight is associated with wisdom. So especially in the Buddha Dharma, then we talk about method, we talk about wisdom. And what you need both, but it's the wisdom aspect that develops this profundity of practice. And so I was looking to understand that. And the problem is when you go to Dharma centers, ashrams, then you don't really get any direction on this because there's very few people who actually understand that. And in the Tibetan tradition, they talk a lot about it because it's something called Mahamudra, or in Nyingma it's called Dzogchen. And so we think, wow, that's like the crown jewel of all practice. And so obviously you want to aspire towards that. I aspire towards understanding that practice and doing it. Um, what happens though is most people, they hear about it, then they go to receive some kind of like weekend or week-long teachings that describe some of the methods, and then they kind of think they understand the practice, but it's much more difficult than that. So that was what motivated me to go into retreat, is because I needed to understand mind, and needed to understand meditation. Up until that point, maybe for several years before I went into the 4-year retreat, and this was in Scotland, by the way, then I had this plan to I was living on a boat at the time, and was just to live on my boat, sail around the world, and meditate on the ocean. Because we are taught that meditating in the wilderness is the best way to practice. And as we know, then the last wilderness in the world is the ocean now, the open ocean. The rest of the world is just taken over, right? But and I'd done that for a while, and I'd been meditating in my boat, sailing around. And then one day it kind of dawned on me, and it's like, holy fuck, I don't understand meditation. This isn't going to work. And I need to go into retreat. I need to find out. And really, actually, I lucked out, because naively I thought just by going into retreat I would come to understand the practice. But the fact is, you need to actually encounter somebody who is able to teach this, has experience themselves, and generally who's skilled in it.
That's
And
probably a
then you
pretty
use,
rare opportunity. Sorry to interrupt, but I feel
yeah,
like it
no,
merits
please.
mentioning that
Yeah.
the epiphany that you came to on your boat. I don't understand meditation. You
Yeah.
dedicated a thing like that's kind of a rare opportunity. A lot of people have just enough to keep them coming back to the yoga mat or going back
Yeah.
to like a weekend retreat. But that's a
Yeah.
gestalt to go. What am I
It
doing?
was. Yeah.
Story.
And
Go on.
wasn't comfortable either, because I just spent a lot of time and money
Yeah.
building this life or this narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and repairing this old boat. It's like probably the oldest yacht in Britain. It's a 1835 Bolly from Faversham. Really nice boat, but ancient sort of thing. And I like had to rebuild it, put it in the water, start living on it, and all that sort of stuff. And I'd done all that, and I'd started sailing around, and I realized there's something missing here. It was
Yeah.
really a doozy. So it wasn't easy. And
Yeah.
also I was in a very comfortable relationship. I was very happy in my relationship. I really loved the girl I was with, but I had to make a choice. And that's the problem with the spiritual path. There's a lot of difficult decisions to make. And like I say, I covered in the biography on the channel, but um, I had to make that choice at some point. And in the end, I decided to go into retreat, even though I knew that it could very likely be the end of my relationship, which it was in the end, and that it would also undo everything that I'd invested my time and effort into up until that point. But it was essential. And when you talk about how difficult it is to find a teacher, then again, I kind of lucked out. I think it was my karma. I don't like, you know, I like to think it was dumb luck, actually, because I can't imagine I've got that good karma. But I foolishly thought if I just went into retreat, I would be able to understand or learn meditation. But when I did get into retreat, then I found out who the retreat master was. And he was the Drupon for Trungpa Rinpoche. So if you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism, then Trungpa Rinpoche is quite a significant figure. And it's also a teacher that I had a connection with, and probably the teacher that brought me to Tibetan Buddhism in a really coincidental way, completely unplanned kind of error. I ended up involved in this particular lineage and in this type of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. But again, it was all this thing. I'd made a decision I had to practice. And I didn't know if it was yoga or Buddhist meditation or whatever. But when I made that decision, all these kind of things fell into place. And on the basis of that, by chance, actually, because I was fixing the guy's computer, I met this teacher who's a really significant teacher in our lineage. And he has a connection with this Drupon, this meditation master. And it just so happened that when I decided to go into retreat, unbeknownst to me, that he was the guy who is, and he's uh, universally recognized as a very skilled Mao Mudra teacher, a meditation teacher. So I kind of lucked out, I think.
What were the criteria to get in?
Yeah, it's a real problem because there should be a criteria. In Asia, like in I'm going to say a lot of pejorative things here that some people aren't going to like, but this is how it is in the West. In Asia, for example, our monastery in Nepal, Trungpa Monastery, then we've got a retreat center. It has two retreats running side by side. They're kind of staggered Every 2 years they enter a retreat that's 4 years long. Eight monks each. And there are people who have been waiting to get into that for like 10 years. They apply year after year to try to get into the retreat because everybody wants to do the retreat. They're really serious about their practice, and it's just like the creme de la creme, right? So everybody's trying to do it, and it's very, very difficult. But basically, in the West, then they're looking for people to put into retreat. A lot of
Yeah.
these places are becoming empty, so there's all different kinds of reasons why people end up in retreat, and their motivations usually aren't that good in the West. That's what I've found. Some are, but the majority aren't very good,
Hmm.
and they're kind of like. And the other problem is with retreat in the West is basically you've got to come up with, I think equivalent in Canadian dollars is about $40,000. You have to give up your life, your job, your girlfriend, um, and disappear for 4 years. And on top of that, you need to come up with maybe $40,000. It was at the time it was £20,000. And I didn't have the money at the time. This is also another coincidence that happened along the way. It's really crazy. But anyway, you have to pay for it. And for example, there's a story of a guy, an example of how people don't really care too much as long as you've got the money to go into retreat, or there may be other reasons. A lot of people ended up in retreat, for example, because they had skills like James. They could do building stuff. Like he built this lovely kind of set for your podcast. And so people come to the monasteries and they can do stuff like that, right? And then the guy who runs the monastery is like, "Oh, we need a nice new fancy shrine. Hey, you're quite good at carpentry." And they sort of end up getting involved. And of course, they're expected to volunteer their time. And so a lot of these people end up in retreat because it's like, oh, I'll tell you what, you do this work for me and I'll give you a free retreat. That's how a lot of people, about 50% of the people who end up in the retreat are like that. It's not in every monastery, but that's just an example. Another guy, I think another guy, he was kind of causing trouble in the monastery and they wanted to get rid of him and he ended up in the retreat like for that reason. So it's not good in the West. I mean, people won't like this, but our retreat centers aren't very good. And in general, we except for a few, then we don't get good instruction. So people are kind of thrown in on the deep end. They're like, okay, you can do 4 year retreat, and they'll give them an empowerment, which is basically to sprinkle some water on their head, say a few prayers, blah 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 blah, and then give them a stack of paper of stuff to. It basically says ring the bell here, say this chant here, and many people they're saying these chants which are Tibetan, and they don't even know what it means. They just read the phonetics, right?
Hmm.
And then they do that for 4 years. So what happens? People sit in the retreat for 4 years and they start going crazy. Most people, like after 6 months, they're just like sitting there, staring at the wall. Like, what the hell did I do
Disassociated.
this for? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I was going to ask you
Yeah.
that. Did you ever feel when you got in there like what have I gotten myself into? Like this is
I would say that many people did that, and many people run away from retreat, especially in the West. There's this kind of joke in amongst Asians where the sort of the Westerners will have like a ladder with them so they can jump over the wall and run away, and they do, and they do, they do. Sometimes you hear of retreats in America where there's like 18 people going to retreat and two are left when they come out, and it's really common, and it's because they go in with the wrong motivation. They don't know what they're doing, and then they, like you say, halfway through, they're like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And some people go crazy. They literally start crawling up the walls because it's like for them it's like prison. That's the way people talk about it. But I was lucky because I had a real reason to be there. And I had great enthusiasm for what I was doing, and I had great faith in my teacher. I was like, "Yeah, this is the chance I was looking for." And then when I found out that he was giving mind instructions, I was like, "Holy crap! This is like," I couldn't believe that I'd have this opportunity to actually study. This is what I was looking for, right? Instructions on meditation, which is based on the system of questions and answers that happens between a meditation master and their student. And I was just like, "I don't believe this. I'm so lucky." So I just felt the whole time I was super enthusiastic. And it got me through without even the moment's doubt or hesitation or feeling it was too much. So I was really lucky. And I think it's because I came in with the right kind of motivation. The other guys in the retreat called me the Choganator, like after the Terminator. It's kind of because you just keep coming for more kind of
it's like
thing.
Neo
I didn't
when they download all that
Yeah,
stuff into Neo's
exactly.
head. He's like, more. I want to know more kung
More.
fu.
Yeah. It was like that. So it was really good. That's what you need if you want to go into retreat. You need
Yeah.
real enthusiasm in what you're doing.
Because those
to lead in.
questions the master was asking you must have been the most difficult kind of questions. Like I mean,
They're actually quite simple. In
but I
general, the
mean,
types of
they got to get to the quick, right? Like the I. Sorry, I'll let you answer
yeah,
that.
we can talk a little bit about this because it's interesting. I can't go into too much detail because it's a kind of private thing, but
Okay.
I can give you some kind of examples. The kind of questions the teacher will ask, then normally what you'll do is you go, well, that's stupid. Why did you ask that? Of course, that's not the case. You immediately assume that you know the answer right away because
Right.
we have all these massive preconceptions
Yeah.
about the world. But if you're doing it correctly, then you will what will happen is you will quickly identify a conceptual fallacy in your belief. You'll realize that, wait a second, I'm saying that, but maybe that's not correct. And generally, in order to do this, you need to be meditating at least 8 hours a day, but better even if it's 14 hours a day. So the master will basically give you a simple question. For example, a very simple question. It's no harm in me just saying this. It's like, are you able to think about the past? Everybody go, yeah, of course. And so you're sitting in your room and you've got like a whole day, like 12, 16 hours to meditate. And what are you supposed to do? Answer this question. So people who aren't really have no faith or belief in the process, in 2 seconds they'll go, well, that's stupid. I know the answer to that. Now what am I supposed to do? And then they'll sit there for the rest of the day twiddling their thumbs or doing drawings or practicing calligraphy or something like that, distracted. But people who are really want to come to know the answers, then they will sit there not sleeping, just what does he mean by that? Why did he ask that question? And just think, contemplate. And then when you come the next day, you have to have an answer. And so, for example, many times then the teacher would say, well, nobody got understood what I was saying. And everybody's like, oh. That one guy actually, it was funny. He said, I'm so glad that everybody else got it wrong and I wasn't the only one. But anyway, it's not as easy as it seems. And usually the questions sound as if they're too simple or that you know the
Hmm.
answer. And that's the whole point. In order to come to understand what we call the nature of phenomena, which is synonymous with the ultimate reality, Manmudra and Dzogchen, then you have to abandon all of your preconceptions. So, and this is really important. And these kind of questions like what came before the Big Bang, etc., are an example of how we basically shelve things. Throughout our lives, we build up this database or lexicon of ways to describe our experience. And we take that to be kind of the way things are. This is how humans are, this is how the world is. Most people, they just accept what they kind of vaguely understand about science and say, yeah, the universe is random. And so if we ask the question, what's your name? James, right? Justin. Are you a man or woman? I'm a man. So we answer these questions. And then I say, where is mind? And then we go, zzz, we kind of glitch because we don't have an answer. And what we do is we refer back to our database. Okay, what have I read about this? And it's worse for people who have been studying the spiritual path because they have all this stuff they've read and they say, "Oh, mind is infinite" or something like that. Mind is everywhere, right? And they say that just because they've heard it before. So we refer back to things we've learned, that we've convinced ourselves of, we've heard kind of trite statements, but that's not sufficient when it comes to investigation. And this Tibetan path especially is about this, and that's what turned me on about it in the first place, because many practices um, are just about training yourself to sit still or this sort of thing. Don't think. For example, most people think when you're meditating, then you've got to empty your mind, right? But then you come across these teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, and they say you don't need to empty your mind. Why would you need to get rid of mind? And those things, there's a dissonance there. There's a problem
Hmm.
there. And in order to understand meditation, what we call vipassana, you have to understand why that is the case. Like, for example, the meditation master will say to you, okay, go meditate for 2 hours. Go meditate, come back. And then you'll say, were you able to meditate? Um, and the student will say, well, I wasn't able to remain in the present moment, right? And because I was thinking about all sorts of things and I wasn't able to remain in the present moment. And then the teacher will say, oh, are you able to be anywhere else than the present? Do you have a time machine? And immediately what we think, oh, what I said was actually kind of stupid, right? And then the narrative changes. And it becomes, well, it's not that I was like actually in the past, but I had too many thoughts, right? And then the teacher will say, oh, so is the goal to have no thoughts? And they will say, yeah, yeah, you have to empty my mind, have no thoughts. And then the teacher will say, so this stone is a better meditator than you are, is it? Right? So it's this kind of thing.
That's so
So the
dramatic and
narrative changes.
hardcore. I love it though.
But this is what got me hooked, right? I was like,
Yeah.
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 But a lot of people, what happens is they go, why are you trying to make fun of me? They get upset, right? Westerners, the Asians don't, because the Asians are like, oh, meditation master.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
wouldn't dare have a bad thought about them. And even if the teacher says, I mean, my teacher was telling a story about uh, one of these students, and he said, where is mind? And the student said, there is no mind. And he said, okay, what's this? Whack! And he hit him on the head. Now, you can't do that to a Westerner, right? Because they're going to go, you're abusing
How
me.
dare you? I never
Yeah.
grab their luggage and go.
But the Nepali Lama, he got the point immediately, right? I have experiences. I felt that. That hurt. That fucking hurt, right? So, um, you know, so this is a nihilistic view. Anyway, these are just examples, you know. But if you get hooked on that, and you really need to know, then that will sort of fuel your enthusiasm and push you through. And you really need that if you want to come to understand what we call, you know, wisdom or insight. But not everybody needs insight. Most people, for example, in the West, they're just a little bit traumatized by experiences or life gets them down, and they just need to learn to relax, right? Or, you know, forget about their hang-ups or overcome addiction. And that's good. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good first step.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. You know what I mean? A lot of good can happen just from maybe even something that looks like a meditation. Like I
Yeah.
really enjoy guided meditations because I'm a
Mm-hmm.
Westerner, and you
Mm-hmm.
you you bet your butt that I have conditioning from that. You know, I went to the public
Mm-hmm.
school system, and day one is like, what kind of a person
Mm-hmm.
are you? You know, are you the type of
Mm-hmm.
person that's going to stay? It's almost like a prison system, the public school
Yeah.
system here. I got some issues with that. And even if
Well,
I
all of
wasn't
our society is like that, right?
Oh yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. The workforce,
These
the
other roles are sort of
relationships.
like, that's not allowed.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
done some hardcore stuff in my life. I've been in jobs that were involved emergency response, and I've
Right.
always found the most traumatic thing is people. The capacity
Mm-hmm.
for people to mess with each other, betray each other.
Mm-hmm.
That was always the biggest hurdle, and still something
Yeah.
I struggle with. And then
Yeah.
it's interesting. You talk about this stuff, and it's wisdom apprehension. Going and sitting at that. It's not easy. It's an acquisition of wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
I've said it in the past, wisdom is not sexy. Wisdom is like the least sexy,
Mm-hmm.
least sugary game in town. So it's such a rare, and it's no wonder all these Westerners are hopping the fence. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
day one, your ego. First of all, you're an idiot. Look at your answers. You know what I mean? And I'm going to take all that stuff that you've been told, hypnotized into thinking is the meaning of life. I'm going to just toss it and then
Yeah.
break down your ego. So challenging
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah. What you say is so true. It's the challenge to the ego that is so difficult, and I think that's what most people suffer from. But it's I'm not like knocking people who have to do that, who have to
Yeah.
run away from retreat. It's just that we tend to get ourselves into trouble because we have the wrong kind of motivation for what we're doing.
That's a
I mean,
lesson
one
too.
guy,
If you
yeah,
escape a
yeah,
retreat, that's like an adventure. You know what I mean? I was in
yeah,
there and then I had to get out of there. I had to hop the wall. That
yeah,
counts as an experience in some way.
yeah.
Even your failures
Yeah, but
count
if you
as
spend
experience.
like $20,000 and
It's
then
a
in
tough
a couple of
bullet
weeks
to bite.
you decide to
Yeah.
bail out.
There's free
Yes,
ones.
that's a
Go to
good.
the free ones if you're going to do
Yeah, yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
difficult that. I mean, and it's difficult in general for spiritual practitioners. I mean, people want to dedicate themselves to the spiritual path because if you're meditating all the time, you're not working, right? So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
and it's part of the reason why I'm trying to establish hermitage,
Oh.
is that in places like Nepal, in India, and Tibet, then up in a mountain, if you go up the side of a mountain, you find some huts there, and there'll be some guys who've been there for 40 years meditating, right? Now, of course, they have to eat and things, and it's because there's this kind of culture that has faith in spiritual practitioners. They're able to do that. But in the West, it's not possible, right? If you want to dedicate all your time to meditation, you need to win the lottery or something because you need to feed yourself, you need a place to live, And in the West, we don't have that. So I think Westerners have got a lot of challenges if they really want to dedicate themselves. So I'm not kind of knocking them or putting them down by saying that. We have a lot of challenges, and it's not our fault that we're not educated, right? We get into retreat, we don't know what we're doing, but we've never studied. The difference I was saying with the Asians, like the Nepalis and Tibetans, is they might come to the monastery when they're 5 years old, and then they will study all that time. And it's only when they're maybe in their 20s or 30s they even think about going into retreat. So they already have a really good foundation and understand what it is there is expected of them. So my experience because I spent 4 years in retreat, in a Western retreat in Scotland, and I have to say the Sammy Ling retreat is probably, especially that one, was one of the best in the West, probably ever happened. But then I went to Nepal and spent a further kind of 8 years there in a closed retreat. And the difference, and there I had access to the inner retreat, which is the Asians, the Nepalis and the Tibetans. And the difference in character and motivation and just how they existed in retreat was just so striking. Culturally, it's just, worlds apart. They were all like brothers, and they all believed what they were doing was so important. And
Hmm.
you really didn't see people getting depressed and things like that. It was like the dream of their life to be in retreat. And they have great joy.
So the
Some,
day
yeah.
did come when you decided I've had my fill maybe of this, and you got out of the retreat system and you came back to the West, and you did
Mm,
also recently have a video where you were talking about the derobing thing.
hmm
Is that,
hmm
are those two things kind of synonymous with each other, or are they at different times, or what is that? What
Yeah,
is all that about?
yeah. So I left the retreat in Nepal 3 years ago, and I was kind of aware for maybe over a year, maybe a couple of years, that that was coming. And it's because my parents are very elderly, and about 2 years before I left, my mum had a series of quite bad strokes. And my father was looking after her, but he's 93, right? So he was about 89, 90 at that point, at that time. So I knew basically the time was coming. Both of my brothers have, like, I had a family when I was younger, but my kids are grown up now. And both of my brothers have more or less young families, and they also have kind of really demanding careers. And so I knew they wouldn't be in a position to look after my parents. So I kind of saw it coming, and I prepped my Lama as well. I'd said, my mom's really ill several times, and I did so years before I left. So he was kind of knew the time would come. And then I had moved from the retreat center to a retreat room in the main monastery, which is kind of closer to Mount Everest. Really nice place. And I was broadcasting the transmission for Trengor Rinpoche's Life Works. It was quite an amazing time. And then I got a call from my brother, and my mother had got COVID, and she was in hospital, and things were looking pretty bad. And then I just said to my brother, "Okay, I'm going to jump on a plane. I'll come out." And so it was really strange. The whole thing was kind of a culmination, really, because I'd done this series of 18 months of transmission of Trengor Rinpoche's works, and on the very last day, more or less the day after I decided I was going, then that was the last day. And at the end, we usually offer a mandala and we do all this kind of ceremony. And then Trengor Rinpoche called me up, and everybody's like, "Oh, why are they calling Choga up?" And he gave me this bell and dorje, which is like ceremonial robe and stuff like that, and to say thank you for doing this transmission for him over because I was using Zoom and stuff. But to me, it was like he was saying, "It's okay, you can go now." And I took that stuff, put it under my robe, I went back to my room, packed my bag, jumped in a taxi, and then I flew back to the West. And that journey was just such a trip. It was such massive culture shock coming back to the West that time, you know, and going from being in a monastery. And
Oh yeah, I bet.
yeah,
I can't even imagine, man.
yeah. It was funny as I came west, I went from Kathmandu, it was like 2 in the morning or something like that. And in Kathmandu, in the airport, when you go down the airport, they go, as if you're a monk, then the guys in the luxury lounge will go, "Oh, come inside," because they assume like you're somebody respectable, who's got money and influence. And so they're trying to encourage you to go into the luxury lounge or whatever, where you're waiting. Of course, I didn't. And it was such a contrast because as I moved from there westwards, it was like the reverse. By the time I got to Seattle, then the security guards thought I was some kind of friggin' weirdo, like some rainbow warrior kind of thing or something. And they were like strip searching me and and being really
Oh.
rude and nasty to me. And it was just this cultural shift. Even in Dubai, because I landed in, in the Middle East, they still have this recognition of like who is a spiritual practitioner, who's religious, and they're really respectful because of that. Because in their culture, when you go there, you'll see many people on pilgrimage, you'll see holy men and that sort of thing. So it's in their mentality. But when I landed in Seattle, it was just like there's an alien who's just arrived, and everybody was staring at me like, who is this weirdo? And it was so strange. And then I came here to Canada, Vancouver Island, very rural place, right? Very quiet rural place. And of course, every time I step out of the car, go to the shop, everybody just goes, like that. And I think that's when I started making videos on YouTube. It was
Yeah.
like I just come back from the East, from being in a retreat for 12 years, plumped back in the West like an alien. And I think one of the first videos is like, I'm totally disassociated here. Strange. But then over the last 3 years, then this it's difficult, right? Being a monk without a monastery in an area where there's not really Buddhists. You only meet one or two.
Yeah.
And being every time you step out of the car, people looking at you, it's very difficult, especially while I'm looking after my parents. It's very complicated as well because you have all kinds of vows and things like that. For example, not eating in the afternoon, and really, you're not supposed to handle money or live in a household and all kinds of things. And it just complicated things. And as my mother has been getting more and more sick recently, then I've been finding it more and more difficult. And so I made the decision to disrobe and become a layperson again. And I have to say, I mean, there's many positive and negative aspects on both sides in terms of self-benefit and other benefit, but it's a hell of a lot easier, because I don't have to, I can be incognito. If I want to go out, I don't have to wear my robes. I can just not stand out. And it's quite important because, over time, looking after somebody who's disabled and got a lot of chronic illness, then there's this real chance of becoming burnt out. I mean, you'll know about this having been involved in the health services, right? Loads of people burn out. And that extra demand and pressure on me was very difficult. So since I've done that, it's much easier. I can relax a lot more. I don't have to worry about, for example, I'm running one of these YouTube channels called the Chainsaw Lama, and it's documenting building this hermitage in the Northern Gulf Islands in British Columbia. But as part of that, to build this monastery and stuff, then I've got to cut down trees and things, and that's something that a monk's not supposed to do. So obviously, there's always this kind of this dissonance in my conduct, which is I'm uncomfortable with and also can attract kind of criticism from others. So now that I'm not a monk, I don't have to worry about that. That's just a simple example, really.
That's so interesting. I had a dream last night about a spiritual practitioner that I regard in high esteem, and he was an arborist. He was cutting down
Yeah,
trees. So
yeah,
weird synchronicity.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's specifically in Buddhism, right? It's not for all spirituality, but in general, we have this feeling like you shouldn't cut down trees and things like
yeah.
that. But it's a very specific rule and commitment for monks. Of course, if you're using trees to build a monastery, it is kind of allowed. Really, you're not allowed to cut down a tree or even cut grass or to get somebody else to do it for you. But if you're building a monastery, you can cut down a tree. You can get somebody else to cut down a tree for you, but you're still not supposed to do it yourself. But the thing is, in the Tibetans are the worst when it comes to their vows. They kind of ignore most of them. So even though there are all these vows and different traditions have different levels of how much they respect those vows. For example, in Sri Lanka, etc., these places they don't eat in the afternoon. They're very strict about it. But when these monks come to the West and start up Dharma centers, they very quickly lose those vows because nobody else is doing it, right?
But you're
So,
wise enough and learned enough that I don't think you need rules anymore.
well,
You know what I'm
what are
saying?
you
Like,
trying to butter me up for?
no. What I'm saying
No.
is, it sounds any psychologist would be like toxic, narcissist.
Yeah,
And lots of people would categorize this as crazy or
yeah,
grandiose or whatever. But I'm saying, I think a big part of rules is for the seeker. And
yeah,
then once you've found, if you've indeed found, I just think something shifts there. and you'd be and
Yeah.
you might be able to be free to do things others like I think it'd be neat if you started some sort of teaching situation, because you obviously have learned so much. Not everybody's
Hmm.
done what you've done, 12 years in a
Hmm.
monastery. You've got so much that you could teach people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you're the master, I hate to say it, man, the rules ain't the same for the master as they are for the seeker. They're not. How could they be?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Well, the other thing is that you don't have to be a monastic in order to be a Buddhist. This is another thing people think, especially in the kind of Pali tradition. Then people, it's kind of taught that lay people aren't able to practice the path, really. They can do other things. They can accumulate virtue, but they can't really practice the path. In
Hmm.
general, that's generally accepted. But it's not the case in Mahayana Buddhism, which is Chinese and Tibetan, and also especially in Tibetan Buddhism, it's not the case. So you don't have to take monastic vows. But when you have them, then for me, there was the dissonance arose because in my mind, there's no point in taking vows unless you're going to try to keep them. But the attitude that many people have is like one person said, "Oh, you don't have to disrobe. I'm a monk, I'm a nun, and I've got a husband and all this kind of thing." And I think it's like, well, if you're not going to keep the vows, why call yourself a nun?
Yeah,
You can say
yeah.
I'm a spiritual practitioner. That's totally valid. In our tradition, our most famous spiritual practitioner was Milarepa, and he was a layperson. And also, there are practices that, for example, I haven't talked about this a lot because it's a kind of difficult topic and you don't want to give people the wrong idea. But there's practices that you can do as a layperson that a monastic is not allowed to do. And so, for
Hmm.
example, the kind of practices that a married couple will engage in. And so there are many valid paths. This is the thing about method and wisdom. There's method and there's wisdom. And the goal is to achieve insight or wisdom. But
Right.
there are many different methods that will achieve that goal, and they're not all the same. And one of them, especially associated with what is called the vows of personal liberation, are the monastic vows. But there are other paths that lead to this. Of
Keeping your
course, in the
vows is a
Pali
total
Canon, they
thing
don't
too.
accept that.
Well,
Sorry?
like like keeping vows is a total path too. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like if nobody keeps their vows, then we don't learn anything about what vow keeping
yeah,
has to offer.
yeah. And also, what's the point, right, of just being a nominal monastic? Like, I don't keep any of the vows, but I keep the same vows as a layperson, because laypersons, people can take
Right.
vows. You
Right.
can take one, two, three, four, five. You can take eight, or you can take all of them. It's up to you. But if you're just say I'm a monk or a nun in name, but you don't keep any of your vows, for example, it's quite clear that a monastics cannot be married. And you might say, well, in the Japanese tradition, they have married monks, but they kind of look like monks, but they're not actually fully ordained monks.
Oh, okay.
But to my mind, it was something that I always struggled with because I took my vows, I took it very seriously. And then, for example, somebody I took vows with, he said, "Oh, okay, now I'm a monk. I've got to go out and get a job." And I just kind of thought, like, what's the point? You know? Or,
Yeah.
or people would say, for example, you don't not supposed to eat in the afternoon. So I said, "Okay, I'm a monk now. I'm not going to eat in the afternoon." And then people would not eat in the afternoon for one day. Next day they'd be eating, and then say, "Oh, but we're not supposed to eat in the afternoon." And then people will say, "Yeah, well, nobody keeps that vow." And to me, this is a really bad way of thinking. It's a bit like how people say, "Oh, it's okay whatever Trump does because the Democrats are just the same." It's like the other sideism, right?
You didn't
It's
even find
like,
a scripture to justify it? You didn't even
yeah,
find one hidden scripture that's
exactly.
like, see, case
Yeah,
law. I can
exactly.
eat in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
like this attitude that, well, nobody, other people aren't doing it, so why should I? It's the exact
Mm.
opposite, right? It's like bringing things down. When I was in retreat in Scotland, my mentality was the other way. You should always move towards trying to do better, because then you will get better results. And that's your choice, right? If you want to be on the path, a particular path.
Do you believe
But
in?
most
Oh,
people,
sorry. Sorry.
yeah,
I'm chomping at the bit to ask you a question,
no,
but I
please, yeah, yeah,
apologize.
ask away.
Do you believe in multiple lives?
Oh yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
you're coming back?
uh, I'm coming back. I might even end up in hell. That's why I want to practice. It's one of the reasons I want to practice.
Okay.
I mean, you have to understand there's different presentations of what it means to have a future life or a rebirth. And again, the most important thing, we've got method and wisdom, and these are relative, right? And they're relative to a view. There's different types of views. For example, I'll give you an example. Method and wisdom, method becomes wisdom, right? This is what you do. You engage in a method, and that becomes wisdom. But then the wisdom becomes method itself. And you use that as a method to achieve deeper, more profound wisdom. So the analogy I always give is when a young child comes to preschool, then they learn the alphabet. And the way they do that is they're given like A for alligator. So they got little shapes of an alligator, or A for apple or whatever, B for boy. They've got pictures, and that helps them to identify the letters. And then through that process, through that methodology, they gain the wisdom of the alphabet. But then the alphabet becomes the method for learning vocabulary. A, P, 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 L, E, right? So they use that, and then they develop the wisdom of some level of vocabulary, and then they develop sort of grammar, and eventually they can, when they're older, they can get a PhD in English language. So this is the process by which method becomes wisdom. And it's based on a kind of fundamental underlying view. And so when it comes to the idea of anything within the Buddha Dharma, you have to look at it in context of the particular view. This is kind of a difficult topic, but it's good to understand the Buddhist path. Why is the view so important? Well, this is what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. What are our underlying beliefs? What are called first principles, our underlying assumptions about reality, right? And in the lower levels of view, they're very similar to a scientific presentation in that the Vaibhashikas or the particularists, the atomists, they believe that all phenomena, external phenomena, are made up of atoms. They're actually quantum particles, as it's taught. They're indivisible particles. But these are solid things. But the point is they're one-dimensional. They're so small that on their own, they have no meaning. So because of this, then external phenomena, for example, this rock possesses no fixed identity. So if you say to a child, what's that? That's a rock. Is it real? Yes, it's real. But somebody who has ability to use logic will understand that if you start hitting that with a hammer, it will break down. And then if it becomes sand, you can say, well, where's the rock, right? So the rock doesn't have this kind of fixed identity. The other thing that they state in this first level of view is that consciousness is made up of discrete moments of awareness. So they're like quantum time moments of awareness. Why is this important? Because what we perceive is presence, right? You've heard of this. You guys are meditators, so you know I need to rest in presence. And this is what we were talking about. Are you able to be in anything other than the present moment? Okay, so we've got this discrete moment of awareness, but we contrive a narrative or continuum based on past memories and future aspirations. And we see that thing to be real, but it never exists at one point, right? So for this lower level of view, these moments of consciousness are seen to be real things, a bit like particles or atoms. But the significance of this continuum is that has no self. For example, if we see a range of mountains, the Rocky Mountains, we can see the tall mountains over there and the low mountains in the valley, right? We can see it all at once. If we look at a river, we can see uphill of the river and we can see it flow down to the bottom. That's a continuum. But we think experience is like that. For example, past, present, and future, Justin or James, is a continuum. That's how we conceptualize it. But all we have is this present moment. We can't sort of go, oh, there's the past me, there's the future me. Do you understand the difference? So this is important within the particular school. And for them, then you need a process by which this consciousness can move from one lifetime to another. Do you see what I mean? There's this consciousness, it's separate from matter. Matter is our body, it's like the guest house, and the consciousness is the guest. And when we move on from this guest house, we have to move to a new hotel. And so there needs to be this process. And that's how they describe rebirth. But in all of the higher schools of the Buddha Dharma, for example, the Chittamatra, which means consciousness only school, mind only school and upwards, that is Chinese and Tibetan Buddhism, all of these, then they say there is only mind. Mind projects reality. So the way we perceive things is a projection. So as we can see within this view, you don't actually need a physical mechanism by which my consciousness can move to another body. Rather, what I do is I dream or I create a reality. And what shapes that reality is my habituation. That's my karma. I habituate myself to anger, and then I have everybody's an enemy, right? This is the way it's happening in the States at the moment. People are becoming very polarized, right? So much resentment and anger that we see everybody to be enemies. Somebody who habituates themselves to desire, for example, will have this kind of experience. And so within this, then lives are more like I wake up and I dream one life one day and I dream another life the other day. It's not the same, right? So
Yeah.
I do believe in multiple manifestations of consciousness. And my belief in it, though, generally this belief arises out of things like uh, uh, logical arguments, metaphors, examples, that sort of thing. Helps us to understand how it is possible that one can go from one life to another. For example, within the particular school, the lower level school, they say that consciousness is a stream of discrete moments, right? And the previous moment impels the next moment. So if I see a flower and then the next moment I have this beautiful flower consciousness, this recognition of a beautiful flower, like that. Consciousness is a series of time moments. One is the cause of the next. And so for them, they say when you're conceived, you have consciousness, there has to be a prior moment that was the inception for that. So that's their logical reasoning, right? This is one way to understand past and future lives. The other way to understand past and future lives is to look at examples, like, for example, changings of the seasons, the way that the universe evolves and changes, etc. Also, you can see this through kind of adduction. Inductive reasoning is where you have several different examples of something, and then when you have enough, you can say, well, that's logical to assume that there's other examples. For example, we all have heard of stories of young children who can remember past lives, and they seem to be inexplicable, right? We can't explain them through science. And if you want to look into this, there's Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia. He did some actual scientific research on development of personality. It wasn't about past and future lives, but they gained what is called near conclusive evidence of rebirth. And that's because there are these stories of young children who have specific memories that are so accurate that there's no way that they can be, and they're also at great distances. There's no way they could have contact with this other family, and there's no way it could be coincidence because they're very specific. And so, if there is chance for this to happen once, then it's quite likely that it can happen again. We can look at near-death experiences, for example. We've all heard about this. We know by these near-death experiences that the consciousness can separate from the physical body. For example, when somebody's, well, in general, science tells us what? Consciousness is an emergent property of physical action on the brain. That's their definition, right? So technically, if that's the case, when you are flatline on the table, then there can be no consciousness, right? According to their own definition. But we know that people who go under the knife and disassociate from their body, they can say what was going on in the room. They can say, well, yeah, but I saw the doctor, he had a sandwich. You know, he ate a tuna fish sandwich after the thing, and I was unconscious. I was flatline. How could I know that? So these are like, this is kind of adductive reasoning. But my faith in this comes from coming to understand meditation and coming to understand what is inside. And so that's like a different angle. But unless you
Faith.
yourself understand, yeah.
The word you use the word faith.
Yeah, faith. So faith, in general, there's taught to be three types of faith in the Buddha Dharma, but blind faith isn't seen to be a good one, isn't seen to be important. Um, in generally in the West, we don't like the idea of faith because we associate it with our own kind of Christian history, right? We feel like we've been betrayed by the church and that we've been taught, for example, in Christianity, you're taught you have to believe the word of God, and if you don't, then you're going to hell, basically. And we don't like that. In Buddhism isn't like that. The Buddha taught, don't accept what I say out of reverence or respect or veneration. Rather, test it like a goldsmith will test gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it to see if it is authentic. So when we talk about faith in the Buddha Dharma, we have three. We've got confident faith, aspiring faith, and sincere faith. And the one we're aiming for is this confident faith, which is really informed faith. So what you need to do is analyze things, check them out time and time again until you develop a belief in this. And we can't show empirical evidence, right? Past and future lives. It's not something we can do. So you have to, at some point, you have to rely on belief. But it depends on what that belief is based on, right?
There's a weird
And
balance I strike,
yeah.
and I guess this will have to be the last thing I say because I think we got to wrap up soon, and I want to let
Sure.
you have the final word.
Yeah.
But I have found in my own walk of this like sort of I don't know pagan heathen spiritual dabbling life I live,
Mhm.
which is psychology is very important to me because psychology plays a role in it's like understanding the machine, a weird, paradoxical, strange, machine that has magical things apparently happen and synchronicities and dreams and people that remember past lives. But with psychology, I can understand the thing, like aspects of myself that I'm hiding from myself, psychology, and that gives me insight into people. Like every now and then I have the epiphanies. Like recently I was like, when you see somebody who is absolutely still but seems to irritate the people around them, they don't conjure love around them, is it really the people that have an anger problem, or is it the person who's not never seems to get angry? Who's really harboring the anger there? Because look at the manifestation, look at the fruits of the existence. And that has to do with psychology. And then the other side of it, it's balanced against what I guess would categorize as spirituality, which is a sense of the eternal, which is a sense of, I'm not interested ultimately in Justin. I don't even care about my name. Name me something else. I don't care about my legacy. I don't care about any of that. Like, I mean, I have a general, very human concern for the human species, but ultimately the part of me that's eternal is there, whether I'm awake or not, was there before I was born, will be there after I die. And it's completely non-personal. It's like utter freedom. So I balance these two things. That was weird. Something poked me in the back. I balance these two aspects of life. And that's, I just wanted to, I don't know, I just felt like saying that, I guess, in lieu of all this. And then I don't even know what that meant. Somebody out there, hopefully that's for.
I'm sure it's going to resonate with quite a few people.
There's like character development. There's regular human development. And then there's the side of it that goes, don't take this too seriously, because this show has been going on forever, and it's going to go on forever, and it's not personal. It's all, on one hand, it's super personal. Your development's personal, but on the other hand, the eternal part of you, the one that recognizes you within me and recognizes me within you, that's eternal, I think. Hard to get it out of the realm of the concept.
You touched on a load of points there, which would be topics of debate within the Buddha Dharma. For example, eternalism, the existence of a self, these kinds of things. So it's quite difficult. But one thing that's important to understand if you want to gain some kind of insight into Buddhism is that in general, it's kind of backwards compared to everything else. It's kind of backwards to the worldly view, and it's backwards compared to most spiritual views. And I don't know whether I'm just contrarian, and that's why I was turned on by Buddhism, or whether I like it because it resonates with my own kind of understanding. One thing I will say is that the Buddhist presentation is quite compatible with quantum theory, and this is important. Because when we talk about, for example, no self, most people have heard that no self is an important aspect of Buddhism, Buddhist view. That this term self also could be translated as identity. And what we know is that the very stuff that makes up our being is in a quantum state. And that means it doesn't exist in a fixed state. It doesn't have fixed identity. For example, a single electron will have a right spin, a left spin, and both the right spin and left spin at the same time. And it's undetermined. And this is very much what the Buddha taught. Another way in which is kind of counterintuitive, right? And it also is counterintuitive compared to Newtonian physics. So we generally ask the questions like, where did the universe come from? And so we're looking for, especially within science, and we're looking for a physical property or a physical action that created our universe and then brought about our life. And Buddhism looks at it a different way around. In fact, most theistic religions are the same. They say God created us for a purpose. We don't understand that purpose. And God has all agency. What Buddhism says is that you are the one with agency, that your experience of the world is based on your projections, your karmic projections. What does that mean? That means you habituate yourself to a particular outlook. And based on that, then you experience the world. On the example I always give is, I used to live in Cornwall in southwestern England. It's one of the nicest places in England for weather. And there, the spring comes very early. And when the first day of spring comes, then you always have this kind of sense, right? You can smell the pollen of the flowers. It's slightly warmer and damp. And you know that winter is finished. And so it was one of those days, absolutely beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. And there was this guy who owned the corner shop up at the top, and he was kind of a miserable person. He had a very, very dark view of the world, and he was always unhappy. And I was walking up the hill, and he was walking down the hill. And he's walking down the hill clutching his bag of money from his shop, because he was going to take it to the post office to deposit it. And he thought, a band of robbers going to steal it from me. So he's literally like this. And he walked past me, and I kind of thought, well, this guy's always miserable. I'll try to cheer him up. And it was such a lovely day. And I said, what a beautiful day, isn't it? And he went, yeah, it's miserable, isn't it? And he walked down the hill. So not only did to him, he perceived it as a horrible day, he also thought that I had said the same thing, that I had the same view as him.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we karmically project the world. So science says the Big Bang happened, and then there was these slight variations in initial conditions, and because of that, we have the fabric of the universe that we experience now. And then through various random processes or slight variations, then life force randomly happened on our planet, and then we evolve in this way. What the Buddha is saying is that you create your experience. If you habituate yourself to negativity, you will experience negativity.
Oh yeah,
If
yeah.
you habituate yourself to positivity, you will experience positivity. So that's kind of a fundamental difference.
I think that's true. I think that is true too, you know?
Yeah.
Why do some people do it? Why do they, you know what I mean? It's interesting. Like I'm surprised at the character that emerges when I'm interacting with people, because I'm often pretty grouchy and salty, I've been described as. And I'm like, I don't always like feeling that way. Sometimes it feels good to get that cortisol going and the adrenaline and rant and judge. Sometimes it literally feels good to do. But a lot of times I go, I don't want to be that way. I want to just, why don't I say what I feel like saying, which would be something soft and nice and something that brings unity, not division. But then it doesn't always show up. That's not the mask or the character that shows up. It's a curmudgeon. Yeah. It's a grouchy person. By the way, I thought it would be funny if you're, you know, that guy clutching the bag of money, you were like, I said, do you want me to deshackle you from that prison? Yeah. You know, give me your money and you'll be free.
Like, yeah, no,
literally
he'd be
carrying
terrified. Poor guy.
Yeah.
I really feel sorry for him. But there's, I mean, many of us are like that in the world. I mean, just look at what's happening in geopolitics these days. Everybody's just wrapped up in these crazy narratives. And because of our susceptibility to this, then everybody believes whatever they read on Twitter is like fact. And so the world just filled with all kinds of crazy ideas. And the Buddha taught there would be these different ages of deterioration. One of them is deterioration of view. And that's where we see black to be white, we see bad to be good, etc., beauty to be ugly. And that's kind of where we are, which is very sad. But there's always hope.
Not for ugly people.
Ultimately. Yeah, unfortunately. So
they're like, hey, they're like smoking a cigar. They're like, it's good times.
Yeah. Well, people convince themselves they're happy, right? But I've never met a wealthy person who's happy. When I was younger, I was a musician, so I kind of got in at the point when we were transferring from vinyl into digital world. And so I was kind of at the forefront of digital music, etc. And I was doing a lot of computer work, so I had some computer skills, and I worked because of that. Because musicians are always poor, right? So I had to do some work on the side. And most of the people I worked for in this area were really, really rich. They were like the guy who owns W.H. Smiths and things like that, you know, millionaires and billionaires. And I never met a single one who was happy. They were all really messed up. The only ones that I met who were kind of slightly happy are the ones who would use their wealth and money to help others, who would just be doing charity work and stuff all the time. But the rest of them were just worried about their money. You know, if they lost kind of like 0.001% on an investment, it would ruin their day. They were really fragile individuals. Never met a wealthy rich person who was happy. There was one guy, he was a Getty actually. He was one of the Gettys, and he bought up this whole valley in the area. It's a really picturesque place in England, and he one by one he bought up these properties because he had loads of money, right? So he could have this valley. So from his house, he could see this entire valley, and it was his. And there was even a village in that valley, and he like kicked everyone out. You know, it's like ruthless, kick everyone out, buy up all the land, and then make the village look like a perfect, pristine English village. And he sat there, and he was sat in his house, rotting away, head to toe with cancer. His body was riddled with cancer, and he's just rotting away. And this is just kind of, it's like some kind of dystopian nightmare, right? But it really happens. This is what people do to themselves. The karma is like, what is the use? You know, when you die, you can't take even a stitch of clothing with you.
I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I noticed the same thing about the people that I know that have, not just money, success even.
Success, yeah.
Like I went for this thing and I achieved it, and you're going to acknowledge that, right? Like
yeah.
They scream, acknowledge my success. Like, but the sad part of it is if you're not rich, I find, you could point it out. You could be like, look at what's going on here. Look at what that path of acquiring money entails you to do and be, because it's a competition, for Pete's sake. And
Yeah.
competitions get ugly and they change you
Yeah.
in the pursuit of certain things.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I'm not rich, I don't think. Like, I'm rich
You better
enough.
be careful. Your podcast might take off.
Yeah.
From one of these influencers.
It depends on perspective, right?
Like
I'm
the Tate
happy
brothers
with
or
what I
something,
have.
right? Driving around in Bugattis.
And that would be fine. I'm not anti-money.
That'd be fine. Cigars.
I'm not anti-money, but I'm kind of,
Yeah.
I just say, what is the reality? You know what I mean? Because there's people that I respect that would kind of be like, you should be trying to get rich. And there's all kinds of things that I take it all in and I go, but at the end of the day, I'm me. Like, at the end of the day, I only have certain capacities. I'm only so smart. I'm only so skilled. I only got so much time. I only got so many hands to juggle reality with. So what is static within all that? And what can I regard? What can I learn from people that have gone ahead that I know?
I'll give you a Buddhist hint. This is something that I'd never learned all my life, but I was taught this by Akram Rinpoche. He was one of our teachers. And it's, you should figure out what your natural karmic tendency is. If you can figure that out, your life will become a lot easier. For example, there's this story. The Karmapa visited the 16th Karmapa visited the monastery many years ago, probably in the 70s. And when he was there, he put his foot into a stone and it melted the footprint into the stone. This is quite common in Tibetan Buddhism. And so this stone is there and it's got this quite obvious, I've got a picture I sent on Facebook, quite obvious footprint in it. Some of them, they look kind of fake, but this looks like the shape of a foot. And people were there, right? So this stone, it was sitting there for years. And they built a new retreat center. And there was Mi'kmaq and some of the boys doing work, building this retreat center. And Akram Rinpoche said, hey, go take the JCB and go grab that stone, put it here. It'll look nice in the garden. But they didn't know what this stone was or not know anything about it. So they took it, they put it up, and they dumped it in the garden to make it look nice. And then Akram Rinpoche came back and he looked and said, very good. The footprint is pointing towards the monastery. That's an auspicious sign. And they said, what? There's a footprint in it? And he showed them the footprints. And he said, why didn't you just tell us to put it there in the first place? And Akram Rinpoche said, you don't understand. You need to know what our karma is. So if you know you have a particular karmic tendency, for example, some people naturally make money. Like me and my brother are very different. My younger brother, he's really good at making money. He's good at cards, for example. If he plays poker, he always wins, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If you figure out what your natural karmic tendency is and you go with it, your life will be much easier. When I was young, I was always fighting against my karma. For example, I wanted to be a musician, but I didn't have natural musical talent. So I had to work so hard at it. And I never recognized the things that I had that were innate to me, which come from my karmic programming in past lives. And now, as I'm older and I realize that, it's been such a boon for me. So look out for it. Look out for your karmic traces.
That's great advice.
Yeah. Well, it's Buddhist advice. If you don't believe in Buddhism, then it's so much easier.
Well, Lama Choga, we could talk for a long time. I feel like we just touched the surface here. Like we got the story there and a few things in between there, but
we could do this again at some point.
Oh yeah, I could totally see doing this again. But we're about to have our first
Don't forget me when you guys
right?
become really famous, right? Yeah.
What's that?
Don't forget me when you guys become really famous and you're driving around in Bugattis.
No. Okay. Maybe to close things out, you could maybe leave for our audience maybe your overarching message from your Theory of Samsara YouTube channel. Obviously, you've got a message out there that you're trying to send out. And then maybe after that, let our audience know where they can find you, what you got going on, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, I started the channel and I started the website and everything because I'd learned some things when I was in retreat and I wanted to share them with people. And the reason why I chose the title Theory of Samsara is because it's related to the very foundation of Buddhist teachings on something called the Four Noble Truths. Now, if you don't know what samsara is, it's a bit confusing, but samsara is the mundane world where we suffer. So there in Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths, and there's two sets, cause and effect, cause and result. One is the theory of samsara, theory of why we suffer, and the other is the theory of nirvana. That's how we achieve well-being and liberation, especially awakening, for example. But principle in this is that you have the power and you have to take control. And something I say on the channel time and time again is it's no good just thinking, oh, I like the sound of Tibetan Buddhism, showing up at a Buddhist temple, and then just copying what other people are doing, just out of routine. What you need to do is gain your own personal experience. You need understanding, experience, and eventually you need your own realization. But the way we go about things is that we just kind of want to accept what other people say, right? And that's a real mistake as far as I can see. Because if you want your own path and your own realization to be deeply embodied, then it has to develop in this way. There's something called the progressive path and the direct path. And the direct path is the path of direct insight. This is the difference between method and wisdom. And how you do that is by honestly, in an authentic way, is analyzing your own experience and not accepting things just out of respect or veneration. And so this is mainly what I talk about on the channel. And so we have a website. It's ultimatemeaning.org. And there you'll find all the different information about our activities. I established something called the Insight Sangha. The Insight Sangha is a not-for-profit organization, and we raise money to help people develop insight into practice. So basically, we offer free retreats. And there is a retreat starting in mid-October in British Columbia. We have another one in Florida next spring, and so we're doing these at the moment. And alongside with that, then I am building a retreat center. It's a hermitage. It's in the islands of British Columbia. And there, the hope is to develop a kind of community where people who want to dedicate themselves to practice are able to do so without having to worry about the necessities of survival. For example, working, providing their own food and stuff. We have these systems in the East. They don't exist in the West. And so that is my hope. If you want more information about the retreat I'm building, then I have a channel called The Chainsaw Lama, so at The Chainsaw Lama on YouTube. On the other channel is The Theory of Samsara, where I talk more about Buddhist philosophy. And the ideas behind how one comes to develop one's own insight are covered in great detail there. Also in the retreats, then I teach these topics. So you can visit those if you want further information. And also if you want to join any of the retreats or receive any of the teachings, then there's links on the website. And you said that I should teach this knowledge. And currently then I run 3 classes a week. There's information on the website again, which are covering some of the principal topics in the Buddha Dharma. One is the text by Gampopa, which is called The Ornament of Liberation, which is something called a Lamrim text. It teaches the stages of the path, that is, how to practice the Dharma, what you need to study, what you need to understand. I'm teaching a sadhana called Green Tara, which is the kind of typical Vajrayana performative ritualistic practice that's associated with Tibetan Buddhism. And on Saturdays, I'm teaching a text called the Preliminaries. It's a ngondro. It's a text it's a practice you have to do before you can engage in tantric practice. And typically it involves things like doing 100,000 prostrations. So people will be familiar with that. And also if you just want general shamatha meditation, then on Sundays, we do a 45-minute group meditation session where I'm teaching various different techniques of stilling the mind and developing insight.
Amazing. Wow. So much good stuff there. Chainsaw Lama, that's a catchy handle, by the way.
Yeah, that's kind of popular on TikTok and with the short videos and things like that. And mostly I talk a lot about geopolitics, but there's a kind of didactic message hidden in there, which is really about spiritual development. But you have a look at some of them. It's quite popular. The most popular short got over 4 million views. So people like that kind of thing, right? Like you say, it's catchy.
Craving it. They're craving it in the West, some spirituality. Yeah. Well, this is beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I hope to see you guys again soon.